Hi guys, welcome to another OnVisor learning lesson. I'm Marcel, your strategic wealth advisor. Today we're diving into a crucial topic for Canadians approaching retirement: when to start taking your Canada Pension Plan or CPP benefits. In this lesson, I'll guide you through key considerations like your need for income, the impact of starting early versus delaying, and how health and longevity factor into that decision. We'll also explore other important yet often overlooked considerations to help you make an even more informed decision. So if you're ready, let's jump in. Okay, guys, the Canada Pension Plan, CPP. When should you take it? When should you wait? What should you be considering when making this decision? There's quite a bit of things to factor in when we talk about CPP. It's a question advisors get all the time, and it's a fairly important one. Now, a lot of advisors will lean into the math, right? They'll present in a lot of articles, even ChatGPT can tell you what the numbers are and how much you're penalized to take it before 65 and how much you get more if you wait all the way to 70, etc. But the reality is that the numbers are only part of the equation, all right? So I'm going to start off with the basic stuff that you should know, and then towards the end, we'll talk about some other considerations that usually I don't think see the light of day nearly as much as they should when it comes to CPP, right? So this is where good advice or strategic advice comes into place, right? So obviously, you need to consider your financial needs. Like, do you need this income? If you're planning to retire at 60 and you need that top up in income, or you're relying on that income to make ends meet, then, again, the numbers and the math and all that other stuff doesn't really matter. You need it. So take the penalty, and move on. So do you immediately need it? Can you wait? Do you have other sources of income? Are you willing to work part-time, etc.? All right, so that's the first thing. Then you need to consider your health and your longevity. Like, are you healthy? Are you going to live long enough for it to make sense to start at a later time, right? So health, longevity, and what happens if you were to pass away earlier than predicted or estimated, that factors in big time. All right. And then there's pros and cons starting early versus starting later. And you also need to consider the tax implications, right? So is it going to affect your marginal tax bracket based on your other sources of income? If you're 60 or close to 65 or whatever, and maybe you've retired, you've had a severance package, a retirement package, a bonus or something that pushes you in a way higher tax bracket, well, maybe you want to wait for your CPP because you want to wait till you're in a lower tax bracket after that year, etc. Okay? So you want to consider other factors that might impact how much you'll get taxed on your CPP, because CPP is a taxable income. Okay? So all those things need to be factored in. So we're going to get into the numbers of when you should get what, when you should consider, and how much taking it early or waiting is worth more. But the other thing a lot of people don't really cover is, we talked about the longevity earlier. So most people make decisions based on feelings, not on math and facts. A lot of people will make the CPP decision ultimately on how they feel. So a lot of people say, all right, I know the math says I should wait, but I feel entitled to it now. I've paid into this my whole career, and I want to start it now because I don't know if I'm going to be around tomorrow. That is not guaranteed. So there is the logic, or the other side of the coin here, when you're talking about other realities. So yes, there's the longevity, if I live to age 90 plus, the math all adds up to waiting. But there's okay, well, what if you die at 62? What if you die at 63? Then you've paid all your career into this plan, and it's not like an RRSP or another asset that will go to your benefit, your family once you pass away. This, once There's a survivor pension if you have a spouse. So yes, a portion of your CPP will continue if your spouse outlives you. But if you both die early, you're basically handing over the bulk majority of what would have been yours to spend and, to accumulate, maybe even save it if you didn't need it, and then pass on to another generation or to somebody else. All right. So that is another huge reality that you need to consider is, all right, yes, I'm expected to live here, but if I don't, how do I feel about not really tapping into the full potential of what this plan could have been should the unexpected happen? So there's that, which usually makes the decision for most people. They want it because they're here and they can get it. All right, even if the math proves otherwise. Now, for those who like to see the math and like to feel like they're getting an edge or that they're making like the best decision financially for themselves, the wealthiest of decisions, weighting mathematically, I'll show you in a little bit, there's a crossover. But there's also a third option that we'll explore after we look at the base. Here's what you get at 60, at 65, and at 70, and this is where your benefits, your advantages cross over. All right, so let's jump into that right now. Let me just beam my screen here. All right, so here you can see, let me just increase the light here. So here we can see that starting at 60, this is the accumulated amount you'd get. So the year over year over year, the total amount paid out, whether you start at 60 or 60, 65, or 70. And you can see here that I'm just going to draw out on this. So if you start at 60, your line is a lot flatter. And this is where you're going to end up should you live to age 100. Okay, so again, we're the longevity thing is we're all presuming we're going to live to our expected life expectancy of 90 plus years old. All right, so the crossover between 60 and 65 is around low to mid 70s. All right, around that. It's different for everybody because the payout for CPP is going to be different for everybody. But generally, in your 70s, there's a crossover. And then the crossover from 70, 65, and 70 is late 70s, early 80s. And the crossover between 60 and 70 is further out. All right? So you got to kind of look at the overall, should you live to a certain amount of time down here? Obviously, there's a jump, and the best one mathematically is waiting as long as possible. Because what happens is the baseline being age 65, you get a certain amount, okay? So your base amount is $1,400 a month. So let's say $17,000 a year. Well, if you go early, you're penalized at 0.6% per month of earlier that you take it. So that's a considerable jump if you multiply 0.6% times 12 months times 5 years, right? It's pretty much a 36% reduction if you go as early as you can. Now, if you wait, it's a 0.7% increase for every month. So times 12 months, times 5 years, it's pretty much a 42% increase in the amount you'll be paid out, right? So these amounts are all presuming the maximum payouts, all right? And that's how, the math shakes out. So if you like knowing the math and like knowing all the details, this is kind of it. But like I mentioned earlier, there's another option that is very rarely discussed, and that is that cancel changes. So that option is to start the CPP early, okay? And let me just pull this up here. And I'm just going to be able to draw on it. So the other option that usually isn't really discussed is, well, you could take, if you have RRSP contribution room at age 60, you could take the CPP, and if you don't need it to live, you could put it in an RSP, and the tax deduction from the RSP would kind of flush out the taxable CPP payment. So technically, there'd be relatively a wash in your CPP, so it wouldn't necessarily bump you in a higher tax bracket because you're taking RSPs in the equivalent manner, right? You could tell CPP, don't tax me on the withdrawal at all, and then you turn around and put it, if you're getting $1,400 a month, you put the $1,400 in RSPs every month, and then it pretty much ends up a wash. So if you were to do that and you earn, let's say, 5% on your investment, then not only are you pocketing what you can, you're putting it aside, and an RSP will transfer to your family once you die. Again, unlike waiting for the CPP, an RSP does transfer to a spouse tax-free, and then, taxable on the second death, but then after tax will be distributed amongst your estate or amongst your wishes. So if you take the money and you invest it, all of a sudden, instead of like totally waiting till age 70, so here you have the first three options, which are the same from the first page. Now, because you're compounding returns, starting earlier is actually your best bet. So if you invest your CPP from 60 to 70, ideally in an RSP where you can pretty much invest it, you can defer the tax, and then at the end of 10 years, you start redeeming what's invested alongside, because you're going to continue getting your CPP if you keep living, while the CPP plus the investment withdrawals that kicks in, you can see how all of a sudden it starts the curve starts getting a lot steeper. So all of a sudden, starting at 60, as long as you invest it, and when you take it out, you keep it invested. So the amount of your money that's you're not taking out the whole amount and putting in a savings account to draw from it at age 70. You're just taking out whatever you can, like between age 70 and 90, let's say, and then you keep earning the 5% on what you don't take out. That really, then you're earning lots and lots and lots of interest on top of what you've put aside, and then you eventually live on it. So you still only start living on it at 70, but you get a whole lot more because of that boost from the investments and the investment returns on the 10 years of it that you stock aside. So underneath that is if you start at 65 and invest for 5 years, and if you start at 60 and invest for 5 years, it still outpaces 70. So depending on the amount of delay you want to have and how aggressively you want to invest, are you going to shoot for 2% return, very, very conservative, or are you going to go for more aggressive returns, trying to get better than 5% after fees? So there's a lot of things to consider, but with a little bit of creativity and good advice, you can look at the big picture and make sure something like this makes the most sense for you, right? Some people have different revenue streams heading into retirement. Some people have real estate rental income. They have passive income. They have business income. They have other sources where, maybe a strategy like this can make sense. So as you can see, CPP is not necessarily as simple as a lot of people or advisors really make it seem. There's a lot of nuances. There are, mindsets and feelings attached to it. There's preferences. And then there's the math. But even the math, as you can see, can be worked out. And there's other angles and there's other ways to work the math. So hopefully this lesson was helpful for you. I know it's tremendously helpful for a lot of my clients. If you have any questions about any wealth strategy that you have, whether it's insurance, investments, planning, etc., please reach out. I'm happy to help out. And if there's any other topic you want to learn about, shoot me a message and I may do one of these videos for that very topic. All right, until next time. Cheers.